the first post-apocalyptic monster horror film of 2024, featuring the Arcadian thriller starring Nicolas Cage. This film can be said to be an enhanced version of A Quiet Place, with even more explosive monster settings. The story takes place in the future world, where human development has led to a rapid deterioration of the Earth's environment, giving birth to a terrifying monster that has brought the world to the brink of destruction, seemingly as a punishment from nature for humanity. Fortunately, this kind of monster has a fatal weakness, which is its fear of sunlight and can only move at night, which also helps humans avoid the fate of extinction. As one of the few survivors of the apocalypse, Paul discovered 2 abandoned babies during his escape. Kind-hearted, he adopted these 2 babies and, relying on the rule of survival at sunrise and returning late, the family of 3 spent 15 years peacefully on a farm in the suburbs. The 2 children had also grown up, and whenever night fell, they would close their doors and windows tightly to prevent being attacked by monsters. However, even so, we cannot take it lightly because being indoors does not necessarily mean safety. One night, the dog suddenly became manic and seemed to smell some danger. The abnormal behavior immediately alerted the 3 of them. As soon as his eldest son Thomas came to the first floor with an oil lamp to inspect, there was a loud knocking sound outside the house. Paul, who followed closely, quickly climbed up to the front door of the house, and Thomas, who had regained his senses, quickly came up to help. The 2 of them dared not slack off at all. Once they broke the door, they would undoubtedly die. Fortunately, after persisting for a while, the outside finally regained calmness. Observing through the doorway and confirming that the monster had left, Paul finally breathed a sigh of relief. And during this time, his youngest son Tom was not idle either. As the most skilled brain user among the 3, he noticed that there seemed to be a certain pattern in the monster's attack just now, because the monster conducted a total of 3 uninterrupted attacks, each with a different duration of 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and 1 second, respectively. Tom analyzed that the first attack of the monster seemed to be just for probing, while the second attack was truly about wanting to break through the door. The last attack was more like anger and embarrassment after failing to achieve the goal. From this, he inferred that these monsters seemed to have evolved wisdom and no longer had brainless attacks like before. The scratches left on the door were enough to reveal the terrifying aspects of the monsters. It seems that today's task is to reinforce the door. But before that, there was another more important thing, which was to teach the 2 children how to drive mountain off-road vehicles, because there was very little food left at home, and today they had to go out to search for supplies on their own. As soon as the 3 of them who had finished learning how to drive returned home, Thomas planned to leave alone and rush to the neighboring farm as usual, not planning to go out with his younger brother. But this time, Paul did not agree. After all, he needed to reinforce the door at home, and it was impossible for Tom to go alone. Helpless, Thomas had to get into his brother's car. However, Paul didn't know that as soon as the car was halfway through, Thomas got off the car. He made an agreement with Tom to meet here before sunset, and then turned around and ran towards the farm. Tom had no choice but to silently drive away from his brother's behavior. Originally, there were also some survivors living on the farm, and Thomas came here for love, only because he liked the farmer's daughter Charlotte. He came here every day to work to get close to him. Charlotte immediately noticed Thomas's thoughtfulness and was also full of affection for this handsome and sunny boy. The 2 people who fell in love thus established their relationship, while Tom, who was searching for supplies alone, suffered a lot. Although he didn't have to worry about monster attacks, he still encountered considerable trouble during the search. I finally found some supplies to prepare for going home, but then realized that the off-road vehicle couldn't start no matter what. As the sun was about to set, Tom's heart was burning with anxiety. Finally, after countless attempts, he successfully started the engine and quickly stepped on the accelerator to reach the designated location. At the same time, Thomas, who was in a passionate relationship, forgot the time, and by the time he realized it, it was already evening. After reluctantly bidding farewell to his new girlfriend, Thomas ran nonstop towards the direction of home. He thought his younger brother might not be able to wait to go home first, so he had to choose to run back on a small path. Unexpectedly, an accident happened on the way. But when Tom drove the car to the agreed location, he did not see Thomas, and Tom, who also thought his brother had already returned home, could only choose to drive away. But as soon as he returned home, he saw his father running out anxiously. Obviously his brother had not returned. Tom had no choice but to speak out everything. Paul immediately realized that Thomas had an accident upon hearing this, so he instructed Tom to stay at home, lock the doors and windows, and venture out alone with his dog to search for him. At this moment, night had fallen, but Paul did not find any trace of Thomas. Fortunately, Thomas, who fell into the rock crevice, was not injured. He quickly got up from the ground. After discovering the danger he was in, Thomas began to use his portable lighter to find a way out. However, the worried thing still happened. The sudden monster scared Thomas to the ground, but he didn't choose to sit and wait for death. Instead, he took out a small knife and launched an attack on the monster. But I didn't expect there to be more than one monster, and another monster suddenly grabbed Thomas from behind tightly. Fortunately, during the crisis, the father who had heard of him came to support him in time. After dealing with the monster, Paul did not blame his son for disobedience. Instead, he immediately asked him if he was injured and learned that his son was only frightened, which made Paul feel relieved. But the monsters have already started to become active, and they can only choose to stay in place and wait for dawn. For safety reasons, the two blocked the only entrance. Not long after, Paul heard an unusual noise and carefully moved a stone to see that there was indeed a monster outside. I thought the monster would break in through the cave entrance, but I didn't expect them to take an unusual path and dig a hole directly on the ground. Paul quickly pulled out an explosive and placed it at the exit, preparing to directly blow up the underground hole to prevent them from entering. Unexpectedly, the monster suddenly grabbed his hand, and in desperation, Paul decisively detonated the explosives. Tom, who was alone at home, saw that the two had not returned yet, so he had to close the door and prepare to rest, but he did not fully lock the latch. As expected, not long after Tom closed his eyes, a strange noise came from outside. The monster easily opened the door and then a paw came in from outside, while Tom, who was sleeping soundly, did not notice the danger at all. Unable to touch the easily obtainable prey, the monster slowly extended its retracted arm. Unexpectedly, the fully extended arm was so long. However, this is not the most terrifying thing. His nails can stretch and retract freely, but even with all his might, he is still a little short of delicious food. The monster that tried fruitlessly did not give up on it. Smart as it was, it went through the doorway, opened the latch, and entered the house directly. It seems that we are destined to have a full meal today. Unexpectedly, the monster will be dumbfounded in the next second. Turns out all of this was a trap set by Tom, with the aim of catching a monster for research and understanding its habits. But when he finished everything and opened the door, he found that it was already dawn and his father and brother had not returned yet. He suddenly felt that the situation was not good, so he quickly drove his off-road vehicle out to search for it. Thomas, who regained his life at the same time, struggled to climb out of the ruins. The explosion left Paul seriously injured and completely unconscious. Fortunately, Tom on the other side had already joined forces with the dog. Under the dog's leadership, he finally found his exhausted brother. The two of them worked together to lift his father onto the car and quickly brought him back home. After a simple bandage on his father's wound, Thomas discovered the monster Tom had caught last night. Thinking that the monster almost killed them last night, Thomas decided to vent his anger with the monster in the cage. Ignoring Tom's obstruction, he forcibly opened the cage. The monster was indeed very afraid of the sun and hid directly under the bed, but at that moment the dog barked wildly and ran in. The monster, sensing danger, had no choice but to launch an attack. However, under the light, the monster had become very weak, with a significant decrease in speed and strength. In an instant, it was subdued by Tom and finally chopped to death by him with an axe. The experimental object that was finally captured was gone like this, so Tom had to dissect the bodies and see their internal structure. However, at this moment, Thomas discovered that his father's injury was beginning to worsen, and if not treated in a timely manner, they could lose their dear father at any time. Thomas suggested going to the farm for help, as they had better conditions and medication for treatment, but Tom said it was a waste of time because he was certain that the farm would not help them. After all, in the post-apocalyptic world, medicine is even more scarce than food, and no one would help an unfamiliar person for no reason. But despite the slim chance, Thomas decided to try his luck for the sake of his father. The two of them lifted their father onto the off-road vehicle again and immediately arrived at the neighboring farm. As Tom guessed, the people on the farm immediately closed the door when they saw the two brothers coming. After learning about the plight of the Thomas family, Charlotte's parents chose to refuse without even thinking about it. After all, they didn't have much physical capital here, and there were no extra drugs to treat their father.
Your father's strong. He'll pull through.
Charlotte wanted to intercede for Thomas, but was stopped by her mother. However, for the sake of her daughter, they could still briefly take Thomas in. By reducing one person's food supply, Tom will have more resources to overcome difficulties with his father. Tom could only silently turn around and leave, and Thomas couldn't stay alone either, so he chose to follow along. But at this moment, Tom spoke sarcastically.
You can stay. That's what you want, yeah? No. Of course it is. I mean, look at this place. Who wouldn't want to stay here?
This statement made Thomas a bit angry, but Tom didn't stop outputting. He said that if Thomas hadn't only known how to run to the farm every day and never cared about his family, his father wouldn't have become like this just to save him. Thomas was very angry after hearing this, and he punched his younger brother to the ground, pressing him to the ground. The two brothers parted ways because of this. Tom turned around and left with his father, but Thomas still chose to enter the farm. But he wouldn't ignore his father and brother. The purpose of coming here was actually to steal medicine for his father's treatment, but he was caught on the spot by Charlotte on the way.
Dad will die. Please.
Faced with Thomas's request for help, Charlotte still softened her heart and secretly handed him the medicine behind her father's back. Little did they know that the conversation between the two had already been heard clearly by the man outside. Just as Thomas was about to leave with life-saving medicine, the man stopped him with a gun and warned him to hand over what he had in his hand. In the face of threats, Thomas can only obediently follow suit. However, the people on the farm did not intend to bypass him. They took Thomas to a warehouse and tied him tightly, preparing to scrap one of his legs as punishment for being a scammer and thief. Although Thomas's heart-wrenching cries were futile, an accident occurred just as the man pulled the trigger. The sudden collapse of the ground instantly caused the man to fall, and his companions approached to check, but were also dragged away by the monsters inside. Charlotte's parents, who were sleeping soundly, were awakened by the noisy noise. The man was about to go out to check when he was suddenly knocked down by a monster that appeared. The woman was so scared that she ran desperately out of the house, only to be stopped by another monster rushing towards her. The monster's attack method is truly terrifying. It was not until then that Charlotte noticed something unusual, but as soon as he walked out of the room with an oil lamp, he saw a long bloodstain, and at the end of the bloodstain was his mother who had died tragically. At this moment, the warehouse was also in chaos, with monsters emerging from underground launching fierce attacks on them. Thomas, who was bound, requested to be untied, but everyone was in dire straits and there was no room for him. Some people finally managed to run out, only to find that it was even more dangerous outside. Under the desperate situation, Thomas could only choose to save himself. He desperately smashed the wooden board and finally broke free from his constraints, but just as he was about to escape, he was targeted by a monster. It turned out that Charlotte, carrying a gun, rushed to save him in time. They must leave here immediately. Before leaving, Thomas didn't forget to take the medicine from the table. When they walked out of the warehouse, the entire farm was completely unrecognizable, and except for the two of them, everyone else unfortunately became the prey of the monster. On the other side, Tom was also horrified to find that the monster had hollowed out the floor at some point. He had just blocked the hole with furniture when an abnormal noise came from outside. Tom came over with a hammer and carefully examined, only to see the door suddenly open. Then he reached out with a hand, which turned out to be Thomas and Charlotte running from the farm. Tom quickly opened the door upon seeing the situation, let them in, and immediately gave the medicine he brought back to his father to take. Slowly, Paul regained consciousness and woke up, but the floor was dug through and it was clearly unsafe here. The monster would definitely attack them tonight. Tom didn't know what to do at this moment, but Paul only said one word. Encouraged by his father, Tom immediately took action with the two of them and began to prepare for any potential danger that could come at any time. They first piled up debris in the room, then poured gasoline on it, and finally tied the lit cigars to explosives, completing a simple time bomb trap. At this moment, the monsters in the cave began to stir up. Fortunately, their plan was only one last step away, but at this moment Paul walked out of the room. He stepped forward and picked up the gun in Charlotte's hand, then decisively fired several shots at the floor. The broken floor can stop the monster from moving, and Tom and the three of them are also prepared to face the explosion. Soon, a large group of monsters appeared at the end of the corridor. Paul faced it alone with a wooden stick, and the next second, a monster rushed over. As soon as a monster was solved, a large number of remaining monsters rushed forward. Fortunately, the floor that was broken in advance caused them to fall, and a fish that missed the net was also solved by a few people working together. But this was just a delaying tactic. Paul knew that the monster would soon attack again, so he took advantage of the three of them not paying attention and decisively locked the door. He had to sacrifice himself to procrastinate for his sons, and by the time Tom realized it, it was already too late.
Dad! Dad!
At this moment, the time trap was finally triggered, and the three of them could only hide in the refrigerator with tears in their eyes. At the moment when a large number of monsters rushed over, the bomb immediately exploded. After a fierce explosion, the three people hiding in the refrigerator escaped. The two brothers desperately cleared the ruins, praying that their father could live like last time. However, they only found the injured monsters. They didn't expect the monster's vitality to be so strong that they had to give up searching and quickly drive away. Unexpectedly, the burning monsters gathered together and chased after them like wheels. Charlotte's gun did not stop the monster from moving forward, but fortunately these monsters were only at the end of their strength. They quickly disintegrated and turned into ashes under the scorching flames. Until dawn, the three dared to stop the car. The monster's attack not only caused them to lose their home, but also their closest people to each other. But the end will not come to an end, and the three of them can only pick themselves up and drive their cars to find a new home. Subscribe to me and continue. To avoid missing out on more exciting movies, please click subscribe.